Imagine you've lived your entire life underground. Not metaphorically, literally. You were born in the lower reaches of a hive city, a vast vertical megalopolis that stacks hundreds of millions of human beings on top of each other like sediment. You have never seen the sky. You have never breathed unfiltered air. The world you know is grey ferrocrete walls, oily puddles on cracked floors, and the smell of recycled water and recycled people. Your world is small. Your horizons are close. The tallest thing you have ever stood next to is probably a cargo hauler or the iron-barred door of the Hab Precinct Magistratum. You are, by any reasonable measure, a small person living a small life. And then, one day, without warning, one of them comes to your street. Most people who discover Warhammer 40,000 come through the Space Marines. And honestly, why wouldn't they? They're everywhere. On the box art, on the shelves, in the trailers. They are the face of the setting. But here's something that almost every Space Marine video gets wrong. They describe Space Marines from the outside, from a detached Wikipedia summary kind of distance. They tell you the numbers. 8 feet tall, half a ton of ceramite armor, genetically engineered organs that let them spit acid and resist toxins and go without sleep for weeks. They list the chapters. They debate the lore. They tell you what Space Marines are. What almost nobody talks about is what it actually feels like to be standing next to one, and in a setting where the vast majority of the human race, trillions of souls across 10,000 worlds, will never once encounter a Space Marine in their entire lives. The few who do are never quite the same again. This video is not about the tactics. It's not about the chapter comparisons or the gene seed lore, though we'll touch all of that. This video is about something more primal. This is about what happens to an ordinary human being. A dock worker, a scrivenist, a hive ganger, a PDF soldier, when one of the Emperor's angels of death walks into their world. Because the terror isn't just in the violence. The violence is actually the least of it. Let's start from the beginning. Let's start with scale. The average adult human male in the 41st millennium stands somewhere between 5.5 and 6 feet tall. Life in the Imperium is hard. Poor nutrition, brutal labor, toxic environments. So in the lower hives and agri-worlds, many are shorter than that. We are talking about people who've been ground down by 10,000 years of grinding civilizational decay. A Space Marine fully armored in his power armor stands between 7 and 8 feet tall, depending on the chapter, the mark of armor, and whether he's crouching because he's learned from experience that doorways were not built for him. But the height number alone doesn't tell you anything useful. You need context. Stand next to a large man, 6'4", heavy-set, powerful, and you're aware of his size. Sure, it might make you nervous if he's angry, but you're still in the same category of thing. You are both human beings operating in roughly the same physical register. A Space Marine is not that. A Space Marine is closer in weight to a small car. Estimates put a fully armored Astartes at somewhere between 400 and 800 kilograms. Different sources in the lore vary, but even at the conservative end, you're talking about a walking object that outweighs the average person by a factor of 5 or 6. When he walks on a gantry or an elevated platform, the metal flexes. People have described hearing the floor protest with every step. A low, rhythmic boom, like something industrial, like a machine press or a piston, except it's walking toward you. And here's the thing about that weight. It doesn't slow him down. Power armor in 40K isn't like medieval plate, where the weight is a trade-off for protection. The armor itself is a powered exoskeleton. The suit amplifies movement. So what you get is this enormous half-ton object moving at a pace that a sprinting human being cannot match. You have maybe a few seconds of warning before it closes the distance. That alone, just the raw physics of encountering something that big, that fast, is enough to trigger the deep animal brain. The part of human cognition that predates language, the part that evolved hundreds of thousands of years ago to scream one single instruction when faced with a predator larger than yourself. Run. But you can't run because you're in a hab corridor 4 feet wide, or you're on a parade ground, or you're in a trench and he's on the same side as you, theoretically, and you still can't stop shaking. Humans are hardwired to read faces. This isn't a small thing. It's one of the most fundamental mechanisms of human social cognition. We read intent, emotion, threat level, friendliness, all of it in fractions of a second from the arrangement of features on a face. Newborn babies do it. It's involuntary. You cannot turn it off. When you cannot read a face, when there is no face, the brain doesn't go quiet. It gets louder. It starts generating possibilities. And in the context of an 8-foot being that could physically dismantle you like a piece of furniture, the possibilities the brain generates are not comforting. The helmet of a space marine has no expression. It has eye lenses that can glow in the dark. It has vents and grills and acoustic baffling to modulate the voice. It has sensors inside that can see through smoke and darkness and track heat signatures and analyze atmospheric composition. But it has no eyebrows, no smile, no micro expressions, no tells. It is a face that cannot be read. And what that does to the humans nearby is subtle but consistent across almost every first-person account in 40K fiction. They describe it as a specific category of unease. Not quite fear, not quite awe, but something that sits in between. A feeling of being evaluated, of being measured and found. Whatever the Space Marine has decided you are. There are records of Space Marines removing their helmets in the presence of civilians. This is sometimes done as a deliberate gesture, a concession to human psychology, a recognition that the face helps, but this is its own revelation. Because when the helmet comes off, what's underneath is not quite a human face either. The flesh of a Space Marine's face has usually been cut, rebuilt, scarred over the course of decades of combat. There are ritual markings, tattoos, brands, scars from wounds that would have killed any normal person 3 times over, and that the Marine seems to have simply integrated into his appearance without apparent concern. The eyes, in particular, are often commented on in lore. Space Marines have enhanced visual processing. Their eyes can operate in near darkness, can track fast-moving objects at high resolution, can compensate for blinding light. What this means functionally is that the eyes move differently than human eyes, with an animal deliberateness, like a hawk rather than a person, and they never quite seem to blink at the right moments. Looking into the eyes of a Space Marine, several characters across 40K fiction have noted, feels less like making eye contact with a person and more like being scanned by an instrument. This is one that almost never gets talked about, but it's in the lore, buried in the novels, in the first-hand accounts, in the small details that the better Black Library authors include to make scenes feel real. Space Marines smell different. Not bad necessarily. Not like unwashed clothes or infected wounds. Something else. Something stranger. The physiological engineering that makes a Space Marine what he is runs deep. Down to the cellular level. Down to the biochemistry of his blood and sweat and the secretions of glands that baseline humans simply don't have. The Lyman's ear, the Becher's gland, the Susan membrane, the Eulytic kidney. These aren't just superhuman abilities stapled onto a human chassis. They are a complete reimagining of human biochemistry from the ground up, and that biochemistry produces compounds that don't exist in ordinary human biology. What this means in practice is that Space Marines carry a scent that is subtly, unsettlingly, not quite human. Accounts describe it variously as sharp and metallic, like ozone or old blood, as something almost chemical, like a heavy-duty industrial solvent, as something faintly animal and territorial, like a large predator, the kind of scent that, again, the deep brain processes without involving conscious thought. Your conscious mind might not be able to name what you're smelling, but your body knows. Your body, which evolved over hundreds of thousands of years in a world full of things that wanted to eat you, recognizes what that smell category means. It means apex predator. It means not for me. Combined with the size and the noise and the expressionless face, the scent is one more layer of wrongness, one more way that standing near a Space Marine reaches into the primitive parts of the human brain and refuses to let go. If you have somehow managed to stay calm through the size, the weight, the noise, the expressionless helmet, and the olfactory data your brain is frantically trying to categorize, the voice may be what finally breaks you. Space Marine helmets and even unhelmed Marines have voice modulation that is, to put it plainly, not designed for social comfort. The armor's Vox systems produce a voice that is described consistently as too loud, too resonant, and strangely inhuman in its delivery. Clear as a bell, each word perfectly enunciated, with none of the hesitations and verbal filler that make human speech feel human. Normal speech has rhythm. It has pauses where the speaker is thinking. It has filler words. You know. It has moments where the pitch rises with uncertainty or drops with exhaustion. All of that is social signaling. All of it tells you, I am human. I am processing. I am with you in this moment. A Space Marine's voice, especially through the helmet Vox, has none of that. The delivery is flat, not cold, not always hostile, but flat in the mechanical sense, perfectly calibrated. Each word arriving with equal weight and clarity. No hesitation, no uncertainty. In the same way the face can't be read, the voice provides no emotional data to pass. You don't know if he's about to reassure you or execute you. You don't know if he's noticed you specifically or is speaking in the general direction of the crowd. You don't know if the conversation is about to end. And when a Space Marine raises his voice, when he projects for effect, because he can, because his lung capacity and his vocal cords and his armor's amplifiers make him physiologically capable of addressing an entire city block without effort. It is not like a loud person shouting. It is like being near machinery that has begun to make an unexpected noise. It goes through you, not past you, through you. There are records of untrained, unprepared civilians simply collapsing when addressed at full volume by an Astartes. Not from any weapon, not from any injury, from the shock to the nervous system of a sound that their biology was simply not built to process at that proximity and intensity. Everything we've covered so far is just the ambient experience. The experience of being near a Space Marine before anything has happened, before he's done anything. Now let's talk about what happens when they act. Space Marine strength is, in the setting, described in terms that are almost impossible to contextualize on a human scale. The armor alone, without accounting for the enhanced musculature inside it, provides enough servo-assisted strength to lift a battle tank. The muscle tissue within that armor, built from gene seed, fused with secondary hearts and a reinforced skeleton, fed by a blood chemistry that would kill a normal person, is itself operating at a level that is multiples beyond anything in baseline human biology. What this looks like in practice: a Space Marine flips a vehicle in a firefight to use as cover. A Space Marine grabs a man by the throat and lifts him one-handed without any particular effort, the way you might lift a kettle. A Space Marine punches through a wall, not a thin interior wall, but a reinforced ferrocrete structural wall. And the hole stays there. Pause. But here's the thing that the lore captures especially well, and that most summaries miss. The most disturbing thing isn't the maximum output, it's the casualness. A normal person, if they were somehow strong enough to flip a vehicle, would be making tremendous effort. You'd see it. You'd hear the grunt, see the veins standing out on the neck, see the face going red. You'd understand that this was at the edge of that person's ability. A Space Marine flips a vehicle and then immediately continues the conversation he was having. He doesn't pause. He doesn't acknowledge that anything unusual just happened. His respiration doesn't audibly change. His tone doesn't shift. This is the most psychologically destabilizing part. Humans calibrate threat level partly through effort. When something is difficult, we can see the cost, and that cost is a kind of reassurance. It tells us the limits of the thing. When something is catastrophically powerful and doesn't register that it was hard, there are no visible limits. There is no ceiling. There is nothing to make you think, okay, that's the most it can do. With a Space Marine, the ceiling is simply not visible to you. And so your brain, doing what it is evolved to do, assumes the worst, fades slightly. There is also the matter of what they survive. A grenade detonating within a few meters of an unarmored human being will kill that person. The overpressure wave alone is enough to cause fatal internal injuries. A Space Marine in power armor has walked into direct grenade detonations and continued fighting. Characters in 40K fiction have shot Space Marines with high-caliber weapons at close range and watched the rounds fail to penetrate, or watch the Marine assess the impact the way you might assess being hit by a pebble. This is its own category of terror. The terror of the thing that doesn't go down. Human combat psychology is deeply tied to the idea of transaction. I hit you, you are hurt. You hurt me, I know it. There is an exchange. Combat has a logic. Violence has an expected outcome. Damage, retreat, the end of the threat. When an enemy or an ally alike simply does not register your attempts to hurt it, combat logic dissolves. The rules stop working. And the rules stopping working is, neurologically, one of the most destabilizing things a person can experience. Imagine being on the opposing side. Imagine emptying your weapon into a moving wall that doesn't slow down. Now imagine running. Now imagine that the wall is faster than you. Here is where it gets interesting, because the experience of being near a Space Marine is not only terror. If it were only terror, the Imperium would not function the way it does. If the mere presence of Astartes sent populations into flight, they could never be deployed as the symbols and shields of Imperial authority that they so often are. Something else is happening alongside the fear, something more complicated. The word that comes up again and again in 40K fiction, in the accounts of characters who have encountered Space Marines and survived the encounter with their minds intact, is awe. And awe is not a simple emotion. Awe is what happens when you encounter something that exceeds the categories your mind uses to organize experience. It's the feeling you get standing at the edge of a canyon for the first time, or watching a storm come in over open ocean, or standing inside a cathedral that was built by people who wanted you to feel exactly this way, small and held and part of something vast? Or is the terror of scale married to the recognition of meaning? This is what the Imperium has engineered into the idea of the Space Marines as a cultural institution. In the 41st millennium, the Space Marines are not just soldiers. They are myths that also happen to be real. Every citizen of the Imperium, from the highest noble of the Segmentum Solar to the deepest underhive ganger in a forgotten hive city on the edges of the galaxy, has grown up with the stories, the iconography, the names, the angels of death, the emperors chosen, the immortal champions. These are not just propaganda, or rather, they are propaganda that happens to be true. And the gap between the legend and the reality, when civilians actually encounter Astartes in person, is not that the legend is exaggerated, it's that the legend is understated. This creates an experience that is genuinely unprecedented in human psychology. The person standing in that corridor, watching the enormous figure duck to get through a doorway that was clearly not built for him, is not just scared. They are also simultaneously experiencing a kind of religious confirmation. The myth walked out of the catechism and into the street. The figure from the chapel's stained glass turned the corner and is now 30 feet away. And the combination of those two things, the animal terror and the mythic recognition, produces something that is not fear alone and not reverence alone, but a specific, particular emotional compound that has no name in any language this essay is written in. You are small, you are fragile, you are, in the presence of this thing, closer to the prey end of the scale than you have ever been in your life, and simultaneously, some part of you is glad it exists. Some part of you, the part that has spent its whole life being told that the darkness between the stars is full of things that want to destroy humanity, is looking at this impossible figure and thinking, good that there are things like this, good that they are on our side. That feeling, that gratitude wrapped in dread, is one of the most uniquely human things in the entire 40K setting, and almost nobody talks about it. Not everyone responds to Space Marines with paralyzing terror, and this distinction is itself revealing. The response to a Space Marine tracks very closely with how much exposure and experience a person has. Raw civilians, people who have never been in a war zone, who have never seen one up close, tend to have the full response. The freeze, the throat closing, the prayer. Experienced soldiers, particularly the veterans of the Imperial Guard, who have served alongside Astartes in active combat, develop something else. It's not that the fear goes away. The physiological response never fully goes away, because the body is not stupid and the body knows what it's looking at. But the meaning of the response changes. An experienced veteran guardsman who has served alongside Space Marines, who has watched one take a lasbolt to the face that would have taken the veteran's head off, and watched the Marine wipe the carbon scoring off his cheek and keep moving. That veteran has integrated the experience. It has become part of his operational framework. The Space Marine is a fact of the environment now, like the size of the artillery or the range of the enemy's weapons. It's information he has learned to use rather than be paralyzed by. What this looks like is a studied, almost aggressive normalcy. Veterans of Space Marine campaigns often describe the Marines in terms that are conspicuously casual, almost as if they're performing normalcy to prove something to themselves and their comrades. Yeah, the angels showed up. Good. Now we can worry about the actual problem. The Space Marines themselves understand this. The better written Astartes characters in 40K fiction are explicitly aware of the effect they have on baseline humans and make calculated choices about how to manage it. They know not to move too quickly around untested soldiers. They know to announce themselves verbally before entering a room if the humans inside are armed and jumpy. They know, the older ones particularly, that their presence in a space changes the emotional temperature of that space, and that this must be accounted for operationally. There's something almost melancholy in this. These beings of incomprehensible power conducting a kind of constant social engineering just to be able to work alongside the people they were created to protect, because what they are is itself a weapon pointed at the psychology of those around them. One consistent quirk in 40K fiction that is worth noting: children are not always afraid. Children, particularly very young children, below the age where cultural context fully kicks in, sometimes respond to Space Marines with something closer to wonder than terror. The big, armored figure is processed differently by a child's brain than by an adult's. Adults have categories. Adults have learned what threat looks like and have cultural context for what Space Marines mean. Adults have the Ministorum's lessons and the neighborhood elders' stories and the propaganda reels and all the weight of Imperial mythology to tell them how to feel. A small child who has never fully integrated any of that yet just sees something enormous and interesting and different. There are scenes across Black Library fiction of Space Marines encountering children who walk directly up to them without hesitation, who ask questions, who want to touch the armor, who are not performing the expected response at all. And the Space Marines, in these moments, are often at something like a loss. These are beings engineered for war, for the processing of tactical information and the execution of violence at superhuman efficiency. And a 4-year-old who won't stop asking why their armor is that color is not in the operational handbook. Some Space Marines are gentle with children, not because they've been trained to be, but because it seems to reach something underneath the conditioning, something that remembers, faintly, what it was to be young and small and curious before all of that was burned away. These are some of the most quietly devastating moments in the entire lore. The demigod made uncertain by a child, the perfect killing machine sitting very still, so a small person can trace the battle markings on its greave. When the Space Marines are done, they leave. They don't do aftermath management. They don't hold debriefs with the local population. They don't explain what happened or what they were doing or whether the threat is resolved. They simply depart, and they take whatever they brought with them. What they leave behind is people who have to live with what they just experienced. And the living with it is its own process. Some people become devout. The encounter with an actual angel of death, the living embodiment of the Emperor's will, drives them deeper into the Ministorum's embrace. They have seen the myth with their own eyes and been confirmed in their faith. These are the citizens who put new icons on their mantelpieces, who add the chapter symbol to their prayer beads, who tell the story endlessly to anyone who will listen for the rest of their lives. Some people become disturbed, not in a dramatic way, not necessarily in a way that's visible, but something shifts in their internal model of the world. They have experienced something that exceeded every category they had, and categories, once exceeded, don't simply grow back. What used to be the most frightening thing they could imagine, the local enforcer, the underhive gang boss, the magistratum bully, is now, measurably, not the most frightening thing. They know, now, how far the scale extends, and that knowledge doesn't always sit comfortably. There are also people who become obsessed, not with the violence, not always, with the idea, with the question of what it would take to become that. These are usually the young, The ones who are already looking for something larger than the hab block they were born in. The ones for whom the encounter doesn't trigger the prey response so much as the recognition response. A feeling not of run, but of that. I want to be part of that. These are sometimes the people who walk into the nearest Imperial Guard recruiting depot the next morning, or who track down the Space Marine's vessel, or who, in rare cases, find a way to present themselves to the chapter itself. Because here is a thing that most Space Marine coverage never fully grapples with. Space Marines are made from humans, specifically from young humans, boys, almost always, though the law is complicated, who are found worthy through trials that would kill the majority of those who attempt them. Somewhere, at some point, there was a child or an adolescent who saw or heard or experienced something about the Astartes and thought, I want that to be my life. And then, against every statistical probability, went and made it happen. The Space Marines that walk through your hab block today were, once, ordinary people. From worlds not unlike yours. From families not unlike yours. The process of becoming Astartes is violent, long, and fundamentally transformative in ways that go beyond the physical. The person who comes out the other side is not the person who went in, but the fact that there was a person who went in. A frightened, determined, ambitious, desperate human child is one of the most important facts in the entire setting. So let's pull this all together. A Space Marine walking through your hab block is, at minimum, all of the following things happening simultaneously. A physical object of such scale and mass that it alters how you perceive the space around it. A being moving with a speed and certainty that all your instincts flag as predator. A face you cannot read, offering you no data with which to predict its behavior. A smell your limbic system categorizes somewhere between large animal and industrial process. A voice that arrives as a physical event, not just an acoustic one. A demonstration in every movement of casual power that your mind cannot find a ceiling for. And woven through all of it, a mythic recognition. This is the thing from the stories, the thing from the chapel glass, the thing your grandfather swore he saw once on a battlefield and never quite recovered from seeing. None of these things are the violence. The violence, if it comes, is almost a relief. Violence has rules. Violence can be survived or not survived, and either way it has an ending. It's the before. It's the proximity. It's the experience of standing next to something that has compressed the full scale of human vulnerability into a single, embodied moment and made it walk through your neighborhood. The terror of a Space Marine to an ordinary human is, at its root, the terror of scale, of distance, of the vast gap between what you are and what this thing is. It is the sudden, total physical comprehension of your own fragility in a universe that does not care about you. And then, crucially, terrifyingly, beautifully, the knowledge that something capable of all of this has chosen, for reasons you will never fully understand, to stand between you and what lies in the dark. Music builds slightly, not triumphant, something more ambivalent, more complex. That is the most human thing in the entire Warhammer 40,000 setting. Not the Space Marines themselves, but the experience of encountering one, the experience of being the ordinary person in that story, the one who doesn't have the gene seed, who wasn't chosen by the chapter, who doesn't get a place in the annals of the chapter's history, who just happened to be in the hab corridor that day, who went home afterward, sat down at a table that was too small and too ordinary, and tried to explain to themselves what they had just seen, and failed, because some things don't have words, and some scales don't have numbers, and in the 41st millennium, 10,000 years into a war that may never end, in a galaxy full of things that want humanity dead, the angels of death walk among us, and they are magnificent, and they are terrible, and they are, against all probability, ours. Here's the thing that's been sitting at the edge of this entire video that I haven't addressed yet. Everything we've talked about today, the terror, the awe, the psychological impact, the gap between what a space marine is and what a human being is, all of that assumes you're looking at the space marine from a distance, from the outside, as a stranger in a corridor who happened to be there. But there are humans who don't experience it that way. There are humans who choose, or are chosen, to spend their entire lives in close proximity to space marines, not as subjects or bystanders, not as the terrified civilian or the grateful soldier, but as servants. They are called serfs. Chapter serfs, household bondsmen. In some chapters, they have other title, but the role is essentially the same. They are the human beings who maintain the chapter's ships, maintain the chapter's relics, prepare the chapter's equipment, and spend their days and nights within the sacred halls of a space marine fortress monastery, surrounded by Astartes. What is that like? What happens to a human being who grows up, who lives their whole life, not terrified by these demigods, but serving them? What does it do to a person to exist permanently in that space? To be trusted with sacred armor that has been worn in wars that predate their grandparents' grandparents. To know the names of the dead that line the chapter's walls. To watch the angels of death come home from campaigns and leave for them again. To know always that they are human. That they will grow old and die while the beings they serve do not. And to have chosen this life anyway. That's a question worth asking. And that's exactly what we're going to look at next time.